Let's consider about the vulnerability. The term vulnerability may be defined as the conditions determined by physical, social, economic and environmental factors or processes which increases the susceptibility of an individual or a community or its assets or systems to the impacts of a hazard. It is derived from the Latin term vulnerabilis, which means to wound. So vulnerability is a measure of the susceptibility of an object, area, individual, group, community, country, or any other entity to incur the consequences of a hazard. There is something called differential vulnerability, which refers to the different facets and variant levels of risk to which populations are exposed in an area, which accounts to differentiated impacts and different outcomes in disasters. Example, two earthquakes of almost similar magnitude and intensity could cause less than 100 deaths in Los Angeles, but over about 20,000 deaths in Gujarat. So this refers to two different physical, social, economic and environmental factors which influences the vulnerability, which means which increase the susceptibility of a population in India to the given hazard, that is the earthquake, compared to the population with a different physical, social, economic and environmental condition in Los Angeles, where it affects only or where it causes only 100 deaths compared to 20,000 deaths in Gujarat. Vulnerability can be decreased through the actions that lower the propensity to incur harm, or it can be increased through the actions that increase the susceptibility. Example, retrofitting a building to withstand the shaking effects of an earthquake will lower that building's vulnerability to the hazard, thereby lowering the risk. The term resilience is the opposite of vulnerability, which is a measure of susceptibility to avoid loss. The sources of vulnerability are multiple and diverse. Some of the most important factors revolve around poverty, inequality, gender, education and health status, disability, and environmental concerns. IPCC defines vulnerability as a function of exposure, sensitivity, and capacity, which may be expressed as V equal to F of E, that is exposure and sensitivity and capacity. Now let's consider about the risk analysis. If risk becomes an event, a disaster manager considers what are the potential damages in terms of life, property and damages. So the risk analysis involves establishing a standard or comparable measurement of the likelihood and consequences of every identified hazard. The likelihood and consequences are divided into two categories of analysis, like quantitative and qualitative. In the quantitative analysis, it uses mathematical and or statistical data to derive numerical descriptions of risk. Whereas in case of qualitative, it uses defined terms or rather words to describe and categorize the likelihood and consequences of risk. The quantitative analysis gives a specific data point like dollars, probability, frequency, or number of injuries or fatalities within a given hazard or because of a given hazard. While the qualitative analysis allows each qualifier to represent a range of possibilities like moderate, extremely high, etc. Now let's consider the quantitative representation of likelihood. The likelihood can be derived as either a frequency or a probability, as we have stated. The frequency refers to the number of times a hazard is expected to occur over a within given time period. For example, 3 times per year, 1 time per decade, or 10 times in a week, and so on. Whereas probability measures the same data, but the income is expressed as a measure between 0 and 1 or as a percentage between 0 and 100%, representing the chances of occurrence of the event. For example, a 50-year flood has 1 by 50 chance of occurring in a given year, or it has the probability of 2% or 0.02. So the same event may be either represented as a probability or in terms of frequency of occurrence. Now let's consider the qualitative representation of likelihood, which use words to describe the chances of occurrence. So the events could be described as like greater than 99% of chance of occurring within a given year as certain. That is, there is at least one occurrence per year or more than that. The term likely is used when the chances of occurrence within a given year is between 50 to 99%, which means that there will be at least one occurrence within 1 or 2 years. Now, there is a category called possible when the chances of occurring within a given year is between 5 to 49%, which means that there could be an occurrence of the event during every 2 to 20 years. The term unlikely is used when the chances of occurrence of the hazard in a given year is only 2 to 5%, which means that there is only one occurrence during every 20 to 50 years. Similarly, the term rare is used when the chances of occurring is 1 to 2% in a year, which means that one occurrence in every 50 to 100 years. And extremely rare for incidences less than 1% of chance of occurring in a given year, and so on. So these are some of the terms that gives a range of values for the relative occurrence of the event, which are expressed as words. As long as all hazards compared using the same range of qualitative values, the actual determination of likelihood ranges attached to each term does not necessarily matter, because all the events are compared within a same scale, which gives us or help us to express the event in a meaningful way. So let's consider about the consequences. The consequence component of risk describes the effect of the risk on humans, built structures, and the environment. 3 factors examined as consequence of a disaster. They are: the first one is death or fatalities, which involves human and human injuries, damages as per the cost reported in currency, generally US dollars for international comparison. The categories of consequence are further divided into 2 common distinctions are direct and indirect losses, and tangible and intangible losses. Let's consider each one of which and how it differs in different category. The indirect losses generally emerge much later and may be much less easy to attribute directly to the event. For example, loss of income due to an hazard or a disaster, input or output losses of business, reductions in business or personal spending that are basically ripple effects, loss of institutional knowledge, mental illness and bereavement. This is exactly the case with the ongoing corona pandemic, where lot many people were affected due to the indirect losses. Now consider the tangible losses for which a dollar value can be assigned. Generally, only the tangible losses are included in the estimation of future events and the reporting of the past events. For example, cost of building repair or replacement that was affected because of a disaster. So like response cost, loss of inventory, loss of income, etc. all amounts to tangible losses. Now let's consider the direct losses. These are actually first order consequences that occur immediately after an event, such as the death and damage of buildings in an earthquake, etc. So the direct losses are fatalities, injuries, etc. The cost of repair or replacement of damaged or destroyed public and private structures like buildings, schools, bridges, roads, etc. are also considered under the direct losses. Other direct losses include like relocation cost, temporary housing, loss of business inventory or agriculture, loss of income, rental cost, then the community response cost and cleanup cost that happens after the disaster, and so on. The intangible losses are those that cannot be expressed in universally accepted financial terms. One major example for this is the reason that human fatalities and injuries are assessed as a separate category from the cost of consequences in disaster management, because you cannot value the life of humans that was lost during a disaster. And there are other losses that are never included in damage assessment or predictions, like cultural losses, stress and mental illness, sentimental value, environmental losses like aesthetic value, etc. Now let's consider the quantitative consequences, which vary according to deaths or fatalities, injuries and damages. For example, death or fatalities, like 55 people were killed, injuries like 530 people injured, 56 seriously, and damages may be expressed as $2 billion in damages, $980 million in insured losses, etc. These are all quantitative consequences. Now consider the qualitative consequences. This can be assigned to death, injuries or cost. Example, insignificant. That is a term that may be used where no injuries or fatalities occurred due to the disaster. Minor, when the number is small for injured and there are no casualty and only first aid treatment was required. The term moderate may be used when the medical treatment was needed but still no fatalities and but some hospitalization was necessary. The term major was used when extensive injuries had happened and significant hospitalization and fatalities. The term catastrophic, that involves large number of fatalities and severe injuries requiring hospitalization for large number of people. Now, here in this graph, it considers the natural disasters which records the worldwide events of death toll between 1900 and 1975. On the y-axis, it is plotted. On the left is the number of events recorded between 1900 to 1975, and the y-axis on the right hand side is plotted the annual probability, and the x-axis shows the number of people killed in one event. So you can see that there is a trend of large number of occurrence of events with lesser magnitude with a higher annual probability, whereas there is a lower probability of occurrence but large events in terms of fatality or casualty and less number of occurrence. So there is always this case that you have large number of low magnitude events occur globally in a year, but at times you have larger events also occur, which causes significant fatalities and injuries.